The Subaru WRX was one of the very best of the Group 3 class, but after one of the very first updates in Gran Turismo 7, the BRZ was added, and it changed the entire class forever. The BRZ was the first GT300 class car kind of shoehorned into the Group 3 class, and it's so unique that in many cases it's completely untouchable due to agility and tire wear. Since then, the WRX has been bopped to obscurity. Once the absolute dominant meta on various tracks, it's been years since it's even been viable, save for some of the high-speed tracks over the BRZ where it was still not actually competitive. With the latest Bape update, however, it's been given a bit of a chance to fight once again. Still absolutely controversial, the custom slipstream setting, which allows for closer racing in the curves and slightly equalized speed on the straights, has allowed many of the Group 3 cars to work in the daily races. This week's admittedly repetitive, though very fun Rseat proves that. Not only was my Z4 the anti-meta, I've seen the likes of the Viper and Corvette once again prove to be almost competitive, and in the right hands, the WRX is actually a winning car. I would be remiss to not mention the fact that the worst thing about this car is the tire wear. The pit window is very narrow for this machine, and because of that, strategic options are limited. I am lucky then in the fact that this car is a rocket on the straights, has fantastic brakes, and is easily catchable if things get a little sideways. The reason this is important this week, however, is that without the custom slipstream setting, the tire wear would be magnified by following in the middle section of the track, and I don't believe this car would be viable at all. Luckily for me, for better or worse, the custom slipstream is on. Starting in 14th, I had a goal of top 5 in this top split lobby, and with a very competitive driver in the very viable and competitive 2020 AMG behind me, I figured I would have a chance. If you've watched the AMG video in this series, you know the 2016 AMG is currently pretty good, but the 2020 is absolutely fantastic, and in the hands of one of the guys I've been competing against for the better part of 8 years, it's an incredible machine. In the worst case scenario, G-Quake would be able to pass me and I could try to follow him through the crowd, but the best case scenario, he could follow me closely, bump draft me in the straights, and help me get ahead before the corners so we can maintain our momentum through the field. After passing my buddy Nissan GTR R30, I was able to steal the slipstream from Axel Morales, and despite the fact that I knew he would have slipstream from the car ahead, I thought the massive power of the WRX's current form, along with the slingshot from that bit of drafting, would help keep me next to him going into the next braking zone. Diving deep inside, Axel gave me a ton of space, and seeing Sonic was about to get squished, I moved further inside, which I believe did keep Sonic out of the wall. Unfortunately, Sonic lost a lot due to whatever happened before we even got there. Because of a combination of the aggressive moves on both corners so far, as well as the bit of carnage, I found myself in 10th place before the 3rd sector of the track. Now behind our good friend Red, I knew I could follow close and not worry about losing any pace. While Axel had the advantage in this sector with the Porsche, I knew if I stuck to the bumper of Red and the Z4, there was nothing the Porsche could do on the upcoming front straight. Going into the final corner, I left the door open, trusting Axel would give me space. Not only could I get on the throttle earlier and carry more momentum, but I'd still be in Red's slipstream, so there was nothing Axel could do on the front straight, unless he straight up pushed me off track. While he was a little bit clumsy, he was trying to give me space, and even better, with him next to me, G-Quake was able to move in directly behind me and use the same strategy I had to steal the slipstream, and just like we had hoped at the beginning, he gave me the bump draft. At this point, 51 driver had moved behind Red, but with the slingshot and bump draft from G-Quake, I was able to get all the way past leading into the hairpin. Once again, taking advantage of the fact that I trust the drivers on the inside, I carried much more momentum and got on the throttle earlier, allowing me to fly out of the hairpin. Looking in my mirror, G-Quake had moved to the inside, so as planned, I gave him the slipstream to help him take the position ahead of 51, as well as continue to work with me. Since the back straight isn't exactly straight, I was able to move behind the next driver ahead while still giving G-Quake the slip. After braking absolutely as late as I dared, I got right on the bumper of Kuya Nathan and continued on. Passing a Porsche without some kind of big mistake from their part in the middle sector of this track while on the WRX is an insane feat. So my plan was to try to stick with them all the way until the back straight after the hairpin, in which case I would hopefully be able to slingshot past going into turn 2. While there is a good chance I could get past him on the front straight, if I couldn't get past him before the kinks, I would have to take the outside line unassisted and would probably end up too far behind to make a move stick. I ended up catching him a lot earlier than I expected, which made me check up before the final corner to make sure I set up with enough momentum. It's tough following people through tighter corners leading to a straight, and if I can't predict his exact timing, then I would end up getting on the throttle too early or too late and fall back too far before being able to use his slipstream. Deciding to stick to the original plan, I gave him the bump draft after he moved away from Red's line. With him moving before I started to move, it seemed he would defend, so pushing him for the time being seemed to be the wisest thing to do. In the kink before the hairpin, I slowed down a bit earlier than necessary to see what he was going to do, and after he showed his line, I moved to the outside and set up to try to get a better exit. While it worked exactly like I wanted to and I was able to get next to him, that advantage would be short-lived if not for the wonderful Red. It's exactly situations like this where I think it's so important to try to make friends or even temporary alliances with other drivers. Red is one of my biggest supporters here, and he also clearly doesn't hesitate to support me on track. Massive shout out to Red, this entire race would have gone a lot different without him. I also have to give a shout out to Kuya Nathan. His timing for the turn-in and his ability to control the car there was absolutely impeccable, and that move was well beyond his driver rating. I imagine we'll be seeing a lot more of him in the future. After he managed to stick with me on the outside of T2, I knew I had to be aggressive and get ahead without giving him any overlap into the uphill corner, so while I had to lift late, sacrificing my overall pace, I was able to claim my position, which gave me the advantage and ultimately kept me in P8. Despite being directly behind Red at the end of that lap, I wasn't able to actually catch him until turn 2 of the next lap, and that was only because of how many people were fighting directly in front of him. Choosing to take an inside line just in case things got crazy, I got lucky that Red had also checked up for the same reason, and I was inside again going uphill. I ended up benefiting from the carnage from turn 2, but luckily our boy Red was able to slot in right behind me. After seeing that Motion Blur had a penalty, I knew he'd be serving that after turn 1, so I had initially planned on just trying to follow him and even bump draft him down the straights. The R8 handles phenomenally, but it suffers from a distinct lack of top speed, and after he made a bit of a mistake, I couldn't just stay behind, so I made the decision to try to get ahead and catch the slip from the guys ahead. Grabbing the slip just barely, I figured Motion Blur would probably use the slip and bump draft me to try to mitigate the effect of the penalty, or at least I had hoped. After going for an outside pass, I was luckily able to defend despite being in the worst handling car, and I somehow maintained slipstream from the guy ahead. Feeling extremely good about already being in 6th place, I should have known things were going far too well. After catching the 2 McLarens, things quickly seemed dangerous, and taking what I thought was a safe line, my luck completely ran out. Luckily, our friend Roland was able to recover, but not only did I lose my momentum, G-Quake ended up moving ahead of both of us, and the danger was absolutely not over. Roland and G-Quake were now battling as Roland was trying to mitigate the damage from the other driver, and I was now stuck behind their battle with the quick Porsche behind me. With G-Quake now behind Roland, there's no way he was going to let the opportunity slip through his fingers, so I anticipated more fighting. Not knowing exactly what was going to happen, I decided to take the outside route because I did think that I could trust absolutely everyone in this situation. As I braked into the final corner, I had to wait to find out what was going to unfold between these two, and this time taking the outside line was not quite as lucky. Everyone, in fact, benefited more than I did. While Roland initially went off and lost momentum, my bump gave him all of that momentum back, and now Kuya Nathan was able to pass and slot right in between both of those two. I was back in P8. Since Roland was now passing in the inside, I was able to move behind him and get up next to Nathan, once again showcasing the power recently given back to the WRX. Braking late and staying directly on the inside of Nathan, I was able to rotate the car quickly and put the power down so fast that I even got ahead of G-Quake for a moment. He did have the better line and the slipstream, but it was perfect timing to slot back in behind him and reclaim 7th place. As is always the plan, I was going to try to get close enough to bump draft him and give him a shot against Roland. At the exact moment I got close enough, he moved to go for an outside move, but if I had tried to follow, it would have given Nathan a shot to take the inside, so I followed Roland instead. This ended up being perfectly in my favor as those two came together a bit and I was able to slide right past G-Quake. His name stands for Girthquake, by the way. Fantastic screen name. Leading into the next lap, Roland had caught up with the man who he collided with earlier and they were making a lot more contact now. I should have expected something to happen, but I did not expect this. After that ridiculous display, I had once again traded places with Girthquake, but once again our hero Red was in the perfect place at the perfect time. Following right behind, the Z4 was already more powerful than the AMG on the straight, but with my slipstream, he was able to give me a solid bump draft and I tried to do what I could to return the favor. In a situation like this between friends, I would usually just try to keep them next to each other and distribute the slipstream evenly, which hilariously just helps me more, but since Red was my hero multiple times and most recently, I had to try to give it to him. Girthy did still manage to get in front of him, and with less and less people ahead to work together against, the time for Girthy and I to separate and call an end to the alliance to try to battle each other was coming close. With everyone so close behind me, I was worried one of them would be able to undercut me, so I took the chance to go to the pits. Girthy did indeed choose a different path, and that made the race very interesting. With my tires currently fresh and the tire wear in the WRX being very much not great, I was going to need to have a fantastic outlap to ensure I could make enough space between myself and those who pit after in order to mitigate the dead tires at the end of the race. Luckily, Nissan R30 was an absolute sweetheart and let me go without any issues. Last to first was someone I had not driven against before, so I was a bit nervous being behind them when they were at the end of their first stint. After seeing this telltale sign of a compromised line through the end of the lap, I set up to pass on the last corner knowing they'd just switcheroo and go into the pits if I could make it through cleanly. I had to lift off just a little bit to make it work, but I was able to get on the apex and they were able to just go about their merry way. The unfortunate part was now I had a bit of a slow exit onto the straight, and my outlap was not great, so I would most likely now be right with Girthquake with inferior tires, and that tire grip difference would only get worse as the race went on. Not only that, but motion blur was hot on my tail, and I knew for a fact after that pass attempt when he had the penalty that he was not about to work with me at all. With Girthy coming out just ahead of me, I knew I had to be super aggressive, and if I could get him between myself and motion blur, then I could possibly be safe for a bit while we once again worked together to try to attack those ahead. Girthy and motion blur ended up next to each other, so at this point the choice was absolutely clear. I moved right in front of Girthy and was able to give him the slip the entirety of the back straight. We were able to maintain our positions the entirety of that lap, and by turn 1 of lap 10, I was now within striking range of Clever Name. As he defended, I knew I could trust him being on my inside, so I decided to send it up the outside into turn 2. My trust in him was not misplaced, and I was rewarded with a very nice side-by-side position and the outside going into the uphill, which meant I was going to have the speed advantage going into the next corner. Once again being given ample space, I was only one corner away from sealing the deal when disaster struck. Initially thinking I had been pushed into the corner, and some in chat arguing that I had shift-locked and tripped the car into a right-hand slide, I was too busy trying to recover and drift my way out of the situation. Girthy was now gone, and I was left trying to defend after being completely confused as to what actually happened. I do want to address it now though, and I do want to say that I absolutely don't think that Clever did anything wrong, and I also don't think that I was necessarily in the wrong either. This is actually a case where I do think it was a racing incident, and I'm going to explain right now. The white line on the inside of the left-hand corner shouldn't be crossed as it can give dirty tires, but not everyone knows that. Looking at this, Clever was giving me enough space assuming I was going to use the track on the inside of the white line. I was braking in a way that I would avoid the inside white line, so while he was trying to give space, he couldn't predict that my line would be different than his. While I do think this is a racing incident, I believe that it's more on me, and unfortunately it ruined his race worse than mine. If you're out there, Clever, I apologize, and I definitely owe you one. With that said, I got to do a super cool drift, so we should watch that just a little bit. After maintaining my position on the outside of motion blur, I knew I was going to have to keep up a lot of momentum on the outside to solidify my place, and with super hot rear tires, it led to even more drifting. At this point in the race, I was convinced that the incident was actually 0% my fault, and so I was driving angry, drifting away from motion blur, and all I could think about was the inevitable battle I was going to have with Girthquake wasn't going to happen. Not quite giving up hope just yet, Girthy was indeed still within slipstream, so if I could get away cleanly, I still had a shot. All I had to do was make it through the hairpin, and the power of the WRX should be able to get me closer. As I made a break for it, chaos unfolded in my rear view. I had slid just a little bit on exit, but the slipstream was actually carrying me through, and everyone behind was nearly out of my slipstream range. On top of that, it looked like I was on pace to set the fastest lap of the race. One of the really interesting things about GT7 is the tire wear multipliers. In order to simulate the kind of action you'd usually see in a longer race, but keep it more accessible and appetizing for those not looking for a hardcore simulation, the fuel usage in tire wear can be modified to essentially cram a longer race into a shorter time period. In this race, the tire wear multiplier is 7. This means every slide you do is the equivalent of 7 slides, so my 2-corner drift was the same as 14 drifts. My rears took the brunt of it obviously, but that kind of action also takes a massive toll on the front tires, and while I'm comfortable driving a car with a loose rear end, an understeery car can't do much against one of the absolute best cars in the class driven by an old friend whose pace rivals mine. While it did appear that I was able to keep up through the end of that lap, my gap that had shrunk to a half a second was suddenly 8/10 going onto the front straight. I had enough slipstream and did just enough in the middle sector that I nailed the fastest lap, but Girthy's tires were a lap newer and his AMG was not the forgotten AMG. I don't believe Girthy would disagree that if we were in the same car, we would be able to stick with each other and battle it out until the very end of the race, but these final 4 laps really illustrated how much the WRX was indeed one of the forgotten ones. While I was still in slipstream, the gap shrunk down just a tiny bit, but lap after lap, the difference became obvious. By the next lap, the gap grew by a half second. On the penultimate lap, the gap was over a second and a half. At the same point in the final lap, he was nearly 2 seconds ahead. Looking behind me, it was clear the WRX still had some fight in it, as the fastest lap was still just a 10th faster than mine, and the gap to 5th place was nearly 4 seconds. While I was initially upset that we didn't get to have our epic battle to the finish, the reality of the battle would have been much different, with Girthy getting ahead early and staying there just like he was now. Perhaps I would have been able to pull off some defensive heroics to try to maintain my position, but what I'm really happy about is that for the first time in probably 3 years, the WRX can fight again. And while it's still on the list of the forgotten former competitive performers, it's at least closer now to its peak form, and we can enjoy it once again. I'd like to give a shout out to my boys Red and Girthquake for the amazing assists, to Nissan R30 for being a sweetheart, and an apology again to Clever. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying this series. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'm going to leave you with a look at my current members who I absolutely adore. Thank you.